Good afternoon, everyone. Ambassador Kesavapani, Mr. Kalam, Dr. Ponraj. I think there is very little left for me to say after a very eloquent speech by both Ambassador Kesavapani and Dr. Ponraj, who spoke with a great deal of passion that can inevitably come from someone who's had a long association with iconic Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. But first of all, I think we are nearly 3 years, just a week before 3 years after the tragic passing away of Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, doing what he liked doing best. His last event was, of course, talking to students in Guwahati. And it is also nearly, 5 years since he demitted office and what he described as a liberation to pursue what he had always wanted to across a wide range of areas. And it is really in itself a testimony to his impact, his influence, his legacy, that 3 years later in Singapore, so many of you have come together on a Saturday afternoon to honor and to remember a great legend of India and the world of our times. And for so many of you have to come together to set up this Abdul Kalam Vision Society. So let me first of all congratulate Ambassador Kesavapani and all of you for having come up with this wonderful initiative. This is not an initiative of Government of Singapore or Government of India. This is not an initiative of any government institutions in either of the two countries, but a spontaneous initiative of people who firmly believe in his vision and his ideals and his mission. And this is what makes it very special. And today the society has already got off to a remarkable start, doing two things that were very dear to him. One, knowledge. So we have a wonderful booklet which I've had the opportunity to see before, which in very simple language does what is, I think, a very difficult task, to capture an extraordinary life of great diversity, depth and achievements into an extremely readable and wonderfully informative booklet, which I think should be treasured by everyone. The second is, of course, what beyond knowledge, what was very dear to him was service. And today we will have the pleasure of seeing the society on the very first day of its inception hand over 5 wheelchairs to Sri Narayana Mission, a great institution of Singapore dedicated to elderly care without distinctions of boundary of faith, religion, race, creed, culture. It's just determined to provide service to those who might not find it elsewhere in society. But it says something, 3 very important things, this initiative today. One, of course, as I said, speaks something about a great man and a great individual. That there is now, after his passing, just 3 years later, not just in Singapore, but across the world, a great deal of effort to preserve and nurture that legacy, to carry on with his message, his mission, and his life, and to pursue the vision that was so dear to him. The second, of course, it says something about Singapore and about the Indian community here in Singapore, because what they are demonstrating here again is the innate and unique ability of people here to be open to the best of the world, to embrace it, to nurture it, and to make it their own. And that is what is also responsible for Singapore's great success. And the third, it speaks about the indescribable and the intangible bond between India and Singapore. Bonds that cannot be measured in the arithmetic of numbers, of trade and investments and so on and so forth, but in the warmth and quality of human heart. And that's a bond which surpasses, which transcends the vicissitudes of time, the fluctuations of number. And today, in this extraordinary history of connection between India and Singapore, between the people of India and Singapore, this is yet another wonderful addition. A great instrument and institution that has been created today. When I was coming here, I was reminded of the day that he passed away in 2015, and the day his body was brought to rest here in 10 Rajaji Marg, which was his residence after he demitted office. And I was there in Prime Minister's office, and our National Security Advisor and I decided to go and pay our respects to the departed soul. And the first thing that struck us was the long serpentine queue from 10 Rajaji Marg, running along the length of that magnificent street, turning around the corner, crossing another street, and going into a distance that we couldn't see. And these were people from all walks of life and possibly from all parts of India. Young and old, people from ordinary homes, youth, waiting patiently for their turn to pay respect to a man, living to his ideals. In the searing heat of Delhi in the month of July, plus 40 degrees Celsius, humidity of 80%, and this is 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then you realize the impact it had on people whom he had never met, or people who had never met him. The inspiration that he was, that people were waiting without getting restless, without getting anxious in that searing heat, just for that one moment of glimpse of the body of the departed soul, which was lying in rest in 10 Rajaji Marg. I was also reminded of the last time I had actually had dinner with him, and that was in the United States in Washington, D.C., when he had come to do what he liked always doing, to lecture at a university, and that was at Kentucky University. On his way back, he had stopped in Washington, D.C., and he had a dinner at Ambassador's residence. We had a couple of very distinguished and eminent senators from the US Senate who were there at the dinner. It was a small dinner. And he spoke about life, he spoke about philosophy, his vision, about peace, about everything other than science. And the next day I got a call from one of the senators who asked me, do you remember what he said? And she mentioned a couple of words. He says, I want that exact quote because I was thinking about it the entire night and I want to be able to use it in my future speeches, in my future talks. That is the kind of impact he had. And it was just a casual conversation, and he wasn't giving a speech. It was a dinner table of 8 to 10 people, and he was there speaking as he always does, almost sometimes professorial, sometimes like a child talking with the innocence and the joy. And that is, in two ways, to me, encapsulates what he represented in India and what, as Dr. Ponraj said. He launched India's space program, the civilian space program, and then went on to preside over the development of our integrated missile development program from a 5-kilometer anti-tank missile to a 5,000-kilometer Agni missile. But never did he, and I remember the time he was the head of DRDO and he was the principal scientific advisor, never did you hear, well, you might think these are instruments of destruction. These are instruments of power. But never did he speak of power. Never did he speak of aggression. Never did he speak the currency of domination. For him, it came from the simple belief in the security of a country in a very, very challenging world. He was a realist that comes from a person who had seen some very difficult times in his childhood. And it is that same philosophy that permeates our entire strategic weapons and our defense program. It is a philosophy that is non-aggressive in nature. It is about the pursuit of a nation's security so that a country could pursue in freedom its prosperity, in freedom and in a sense of self-assured manner. So he reminded me of a saying that the greatest of warriors can be the most compassionate human beings. And he was that person. When he became president of India, the first thing people expected he would cut his wonderful locks. He said, no, I'm not doing that. The presidency did not define him, he defined presidency. Rashtrapati Bhavan, the great imperial palace, did not entrap him. He opened it out to the people. It was a place which he transformed in his own image. And any of us who have seen and spoken to people who worked with him were completely struck by the extraordinary humility and informality. I remember one of my colleagues saying he went and stood in front of him in his office, and after a few minutes, President Kalam looked at him and said, "Why aren't you sitting?" He says, "I don't sit. The president asked me." He says, "Do you have a problem sitting? Just please sit down. Don't ask me whether you should sit down, and just come into my office and sit down." He would keep a meticulous account of all that he consumed in Rashtrapati Bhavan. It's very difficult to do that, believe me, but that is the level of integrity that he had. He made a herbal garden. There were people. He opened out the wonderful premises of that place to everyone, to artists, to poor people, to commoners. But those who worked with him realized that if he worked late, he would simply tell people, "You see, look, just leave my food and I'll handle it." He might have been the first president to enter the kitchen of Rashtrapati Bhavan. Just to sort of make himself a cup of tea or something. So here is a person who he did not, presidency never defined him, he defined what presidency is about. And he became a common man's president, a people's president, a children's president, a youth's president, a developing India's president, an aspirational India's president. This is the kind of a role that he defined. And when he left the job, he became a teacher, he was going everywhere. But he also gave us a vision for the future. He wrote prolifically, as everyone knows. I mean, there's no need to talk about the number of books he's written and the number of lectures he gave. He spoke, as Dr. Ponraj has spoken about environment, about poverty, about harmony, about inclusive development, about the challenges facing the world, and with the vision of a scientist and a philosopher who sees it with clarity into the future. Think of solutions that might seem crazy at this point of time, but then so did our space and nuclear program in 1970s. But he had faith, and he had resolve, and he had commitment. So across this very vast area, he ignited, if you have to talk to children in India to realize what he meant to them, he made them believe in their own future, in their own destiny, in pursuing beyond their own boundaries and barriers of their mind. Because he believed that the future of the country is being sown with the seeds of human resource development, in education, in empowerment, in what we make our youth to be. And all this would not be sufficient if he didn't embody the virtues that are almost impossible today. We've spoken about his humility. I mean, he was the most accessible, down-to-earth person you could meet. The higher he soared in his achievements, the more grounded he was. We've spoken about his unimpeachable integrity. We've spoken about his deep sense of nationalism, deep sense of nationhood, but a nationhood based on the finest values that our civilization has to offer, of inclusion, of oneness, of freedom, of justice, of equality. He was a person who was a picture of austerity, I would say harsh austerity, frugality and simplicity that was absolutely Gandhian in its views. If there's one person who embodied that, even in the highest office, that was him. He was a picture of self-restraint, of sacrifice. So these are and of constant intellectual pursuit that he did till the end. There was never resting on his laurels of his achievements. As our Prime Minister described after his death, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, that he was a child, he had the honesty of a child, the idealism and energy of the youth, and the maturity of an adult, all combined into one person, and much, much more. So his achievements, his life, his mission, his vision, his own qualities as a human being make him truly a unique person of our times. And it is just as well that I think it's a great credit to Ambassador Kesavapani and to his colleagues to have thought then we cannot simply let that legacy fade away or die. And that it doesn't have to be confined to India or to Indian community. That our real homage to him would be to pursue that mission, to pursue that, advance those ideals, to continue to work for that vision. And doing it here or there doesn't make a difference. So there are a number of things in the days ahead that we should attempt to do. I think, as I was talking to Ambassador Kesavapani, we should look at setting up a center of excellence in science and society, because to him, science was all about solving human problems. We heard about Pura, we had heard about environment, we'd heard about poverty, we'd heard about health. And when he spoke about India 2020, the 5 things that he spoke about, each of them, the foundation is science and technology. Agriculture, infrastructure, health, use of IT for health, education, inclusive development, all of which the government is pursuing today, and self-reliance in critical technologies that are so important for nations' freedom and prosperity. So we must look at how we can work on this idea and together. Second, I think we should look at the possibility of an annual distinguished lecture that by people of eminence, not just from India or Singapore, from the rest of the world, who can speak about and who have personal knowledge and experience of working with it. I think we should start an essay competition in school, choose a theme that is dear to him over here. And we will also work with our government to see how we can make this a truly meaningful endeavor, a wonderful initiative to advance a great, timeless and universal vision of a person who for generations will be remembered as one of his kind in the world. Thank you very much.